Question number one,
Mr. Speaker, while Sunday's result may not have been the one we were all hoping for, I know that the whole House will want to congratulate Gareth Southgate and the England squad for their fantastic achievements over the last month. The nation is proud of each and every one of them. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I second the Prime Minister's support for our outstanding England team and players, but perhaps say that it's a pity it didn't come sooner from him and We all know the importance of double vaccination, especially against the Delta or Johnson variant of the virus. But in Hammersmith and Fulham, despite the hard work of our local NHS council and volunteers, only 36% of adults have been double jabbed. So will the Prime Minister think again before recklessly removing all barriers to infection and transmission on the 19th of January? Will he keep the regulations on mask wearing and, like the Mayor of London, keep fighting the virus until it's beat?
Well, Mr. Speaker, if we had followed the honourable gentleman's precepts, and I remember, of course, he campaigned vehemently to stay in the European Union, we would not have achieved the fastest vaccine rollout of any European country and have vaccinated the highest proportion of any European population, Mr. Speaker. That is the reality. And as for his criticism of the roadmap, Mr. Speaker, I respectfully point out to the honourable gentleman the month is July, not January, Mr. Speaker.
We now come to Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, it should be obvious that the Cabinet is as inclusive as the English football team, and some of these criticisms, I think, are misplaced. Can I welcome, Mr. Speaker, your words at the beginning of Tuesday's debate and the Prime Minister's first paragraph on the Treasury Minute from Monday? Can we agree that a vote in this House does not amend an Act of Parliament passed by both Houses? Are we expecting a similar debate in another place? And can I suggest to the Prime Minister that instead of leaping from point 5 to point 7 at some stage in the future, we step towards it, because a 40% increase in 1 year is ludicrous, and perhaps the Chancellor can consider going to 5.5, 6, 6.5 and then 7. Thank you.
I thank the right honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, very much for his opening point. And just on on odour, of course, I can give him this reassurance. We will continue to follow the law, and he will have heard clearly what both my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, had to say from this dispatch box, and what I said as well. We want to return to point 7 as fast as we can when fiscal conditions allow.
We now come to Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by thanking the England football team for everything they've given this country over the last 6 weeks. I'm so proud of this young, diverse and humble team and everything that it represents. Mr. Speaker, they're the very best of modern Britain, everything that I know this country can be. Does the Prime Minister think that it was wrong to criticise the England team's decision to oppose racism by taking the knee as gesture politics?
I agree very much with what the right honourable gentleman said about the England team. And I repeat, I want to thank each and every one of them for what they did, their incredible campaign they ran in the Euro 2020 Championships. And they do represent the very best of our country. And I repeat that I utterly condemn and abhor the racist outpourings that we saw on Sunday night. And so what we're doing is today taking practical steps to ensure that the football banning order regime is changed, so that if you are guilty, Mr. Speaker, of racist abuse online of footballers, then you will not be going to the match. No ifs, no buts, no exemptions and no excuses.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, that just won't wash. And it rings hollow. On the 7th, remind the Prime Minister and the House, on the 7th of June, the Prime Minister's spokesperson said this: on taking the knee, specifically, The Prime Minister is more focused on actions rather than gestures. On the 14th of June, the Home Secretary said, I just don't support people participating in that type of gesture politics. The Conservative MP for Bassetlaw called it a ridiculous, empty gesture. So there's no point of pretending that these things weren't said. The England footballer, Tyrone Mings, said that Labour Party member I hear shouted out. Is that really the response? Is that it? Tyrone Mings said, and the House might want to listen, he said this, labelling anti-racism messages as gesture politics served to stoke the fire of racism and hatred. Prime Minister, they're powerful words from someone who has himself been subjected to racist abuse. He's right, isn't he?
Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate our total support for our fantastic England team, and I support them in the way that they show solidarity with their friends who face racism, Mr. Speaker. But when he talks about the Home Secretary, let me just remind him that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has faced racism and prejudice all her career of a kind that he can never imagine, and she has taken practical steps to get black and minority officers into the police in record numbers. In fact, Prime Speaker, I am...
Sorry to interrupt you. I want to hear the Prime Minister. If his own side don't want to hear him, I'm sure the tea room will accommodate them. It's very important to listen to what the Prime Minister's got to say. Have you finished, Prime Minister? Are you OK? Yeah. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I totally condemn all racism, including that directed at the Home Secretary. But she's got this wrong. The whole country knows it. His own MPs know it. In the last few days, everybody has seen England's black players have been the targets of disgusting racist abuse following Sunday's match. Disgusting. And this is really simple, Mr. Speaker. Either the Prime Minister is with the England players in their stand against racism, or he can defend his own record, those of his ministers and some of his MPs. But he can't have it both ways. So can he tell the House, does he now regret failing to condemn those who booed England players for standing up to racism, yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, we made it absolutely clear that no one should boo the England team. And Mr. Speaker, what we're doing now is following the racist abuse that our players sadly suffered on Sunday night and thereafter, we're taking practical action. So in addition to changing the football banning order regime, last night I met representatives of Facebook, of Twitter, of TikTok, of Snapchat, of Instagram, and I made it absolutely clear to them that we will legislate to address this problem, Mr. Speaker, in the online harms bill, and unless they get hate and racism off their platforms, they will face fines amounting to 10% of their global revenues, and we all know, Mr. Speaker, that they have the technology to do it.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the online harms bill has been promised for 3 years. I'm not sure a 15-minute chat at a garden party moves things forward that significantly. But I want to take the Prime Minister up on what he said about being absolutely clear, because here I have the headline, Mr. Speaker. Boris Johnson refuses to condemn fans booing England taking the knee. That's the story, that's the headline, June the 6th. Boris Johnson refuses to condemn fans booing England taking the knee. That's absolutely clear. It's not quite what the Prime Minister is implying today. It goes on to quote the Prime Minister's spokesperson, saying that the Prime Minister fully respects the rights of those who choose to make their feelings known. This is about booing. Fully respects their rights. And the Home Secretary said that booing was a choice for them, quite frankly. So no condemnation there, no absolute clarity there, Mr. Speaker. When senior government ministers and Conservative MPs defend the booing of an anti-racist message, who do they think they're defending, Prime Minister, and why are they defending it?
Mr. Speaker, nobody defends booing of the England side. Nobody defends booing of the England side. And if he continues to attack the Home Secretary...
Prime Minister, look, I want to hear the Prime Minister. I want to know the answer, and I expect the opposition to listen to the answer. Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We love and admire the England side and what they did. They represent the best of our country. Nobody defends booing the England side, Mr. Speaker. But what the Home Secretary has been trying to do all her life is not just to fight racism, but to take practical steps to advance the cause of black and minority ethnic groups, which she has done successfully, notably in the police. And since, Mr. Speaker, he's chucking this kind of thing around, could I ask him now to retract this leaflet produced by the Labour Party during the Batley and Spen by-election, which was condemned by his own MPs as dog whistle racism, Mr. Speaker?
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister isn't kidding anyone in this House. He's not kidding the public, and he's not even kidding his own MPs. Let me quote the Conservative MP for Plymouth Moor View. Conservative MP, the painful truth, says the Conservative MP for Plymouth Moor View, is that Tyrone Mings is completely right. I am very uncomfortable, he says, with the position we Conservatives are needlessly forcing ourselves into. So, Prime Minister, behind you they don't believe you, and neither do we. Mr. Speaker, we can all see what's happened here. The government has been trying to stoke a culture war, and they've realised they're on the wrong side. And now they hope that nobody's noticed. Why else would a Conservative MP boast that he's not watching his own team? Why else would another Conservative MP say that Marcus Rashford spends too much time playing politics when he's actually trying to feed children that the government won't? And why will the Prime Minister refuse time and time again, even now, to condemn those who boo our players for standing up against racism? Mr. Speaker, what is it that this England team symbolises that this Conservative Party is so afraid of?
Mr. Speaker, I think the House will judge for themselves the quality of the question that the right honourable gentleman has just put. I think the whole House is united, including our distinguished members from Scotland, by the way, Mr. Speaker, in admiration of the England team and of every single member of that squad and what they did. And we stick up for them, Mr. Speaker. And what we're doing is taking practical steps to fight racism, changing the football banning order regime, fining the online companies, and, by the way, we will use more legislation if we have to, just as we use the threat of legislation, Mr. Speaker, to stop the European Super League. And we will get on. We will get on with delivering for the people of this country. We will get on with vaccinating the people of this country while they continue to vacillate. We will continue to immunise the people of this country while they improvise and dart around. And, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to engage in a political culture war of any kind. I want to get on with delivering for the people of this country. He simply wants to get on with dithering.
Keir Starmer.
He doesn't want to engage in a culture war and point scoring. Give me a break. Football's a game. Racism isn't, Prime Minister. That's why many of us have been involved in the charity Show Racism the Red Card for years. But far from giving racism the red card, the Prime Minister gave it the green light. And I'll tell you the worst kind of gesture politics, Mr. Speaker. Putting an England shirt on over a shirt and tie whilst not condemning those booing is the worst kind of gesture. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister, finally, about the reported amnesty for crimes committed during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. I worked in Northern Ireland for 6 years with the Policing Board and the police. I've also prosecuted terrorists as the Director of Public Prosecutions, so I know how difficult and how sensitive this is. But a blanket amnesty, including for terrorists, is plain wrong. I was in Northern Ireland last week, and it's absolutely clear that the government's amnesty is not supported by the political parties in Northern Ireland, and it's not supported by victims groups. Last Thursday, I spoke to victims of terrorism at the Wave Trauma Centre in North Belfast. Mr. Speaker, they haven't even been properly consulted on this proposal. If things are to move forward in Northern Ireland, any discussion has to start with the victims. Politicians in London can't simply draw a line under terrorism and other crimes and then forced it on those most affected. The Prime Minister looks up, so let him look up and let him hear. Because I want to quote Julie Hambleton, Prime Minister. Her sister Maxine was among the 21 people killed by the IRA in the Birmingham pub bombings. So that's Julie Hambleton, Prime Minister. She says, tell me, Prime Minister, if one of your loved ones was blown up beyond recognition, where you were only able to identify your son or daughter by their fingernails, would you be so quick to grant their murderers an amnesty and propose such obscene legislation? What does the Prime Minister have to say to Julie, and she's listening, and other victims like her?
Mr. Speaker, I think that the whole House will acknowledge the suffering of victims like Julie and their families. And, of course, nothing I say or can do now can in any way mitigate her loss, and that is clear. But it is also true that the people of Northern Ireland must, if we possibly can allow them to, they must move forwards now. And he will know that the proposals that are being brought forward, and the House will hear about them in more detail later on from my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. The proposals that are being brought forward are measured, they are balanced, and they have a wide degree of support, I may say, from former Labour Prime Ministers and former Labour leaders who I think are of considerable more distinction, I may say, than the right honourable gentleman opposite. And he will recall that it was under that Labour administration that many terrorists were unfortunately given effectively an amnesty, and they were allowed to escape the full consequences of their crimes, as he knows very well, and that is the reality, whilst the sad fact remains that, and this is of course no consolation to people like Julie, but the sad fact remains that there are many members of the armed services who continue to face the threat of vexatious prosecutions well into their 70s and 80s and later. And we are finally, Mr. Speaker, bringing forward a solution to this problem, to enable the province of Northern Ireland to draw a line under the Troubles, to enable the people of Northern Ireland to move forward. And I think someone with greater statesmanship and clarity of vision would have seen that, Mr. Speaker, and given these proposals a fair wind.
Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the scandalous situation at Wally's Quarry landfill in my constituency with the noxious gas emissions is, I'm afraid, continuing. To date, there's been no apology from the operator, Red Industries, and no credible explanation for the odour that is blighting the lives and the health of so many of my residents. So what assurances can the Prime Minister give me today that every effort will be made to speed up the works that have been mandated by the Environment Agency, that we will get a deadline as to when we can expect this awful situation to be resolved, and that those responsible are held fully to account?
Stop the stick. Mr. Speaker, I yield to no one in my admiration for the Environment Agency, but in this case, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend because they are not, in my view, sorting this problem out fast enough. I am fed up with this being raised with me. We must stop the stink, and I want the air around Wally's Quarry to be of alpine freshness before too long.
Ian Blackford, the SNP leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me begin by congratulating the England team for reaching the final, an incredible achievement. But the tragedy of the tournament was the undercurrent of racism that was ultimately targeted at three young men, Rashford, Sancho and Saka. Mr. Speaker, wherever there is racism, it falls on all of us to face it down and to call it out. And it is shameful that it took until last night for the Prime Minister to meet with the main social media companies and finally wake up to the fact that those who publish and promote vile, racist online abuse need to be faced down and sanctioned. So, can the Prime Minister tell us what sanctions he thinks would be appropriate for someone who publishes racist content? And it is shocking even to have to say this out loud, describing Africans as flag-waving piccaninnies with watermelon smiles.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've commented many times about the words that I've said in the past, and I think the House understands how. I think the House understands how you can take things out of context, Mr. Speaker. I think people do understand that, but what they also understand is that there is a chance now to hold these internet companies to account and to make sure that they face fines running to 10% of their global income if they fail to take hate and racism off their platforms, Mr. Speaker. And I hope, actually, that the Scottish Nationalist Party will support it.
Ian Blackford.
You know, still no contrition, still no apology. And, Mr. Speaker, the truth is that the Tory party doesn't sanction those who publish that kind of racist content. They promote them to be Prime Minister. The legacy of this Prime Minister's dog whistling has followed him into 10 Downing Street, and it is now at the heart of this Tory government. As the England International Tyrone Mings has so powerfully stated, this government doesn't get to stoke the fires of racism and pretend to be disgusted when it happens. They don't get to condemn the racism of others, but deny that the racism that they have even provoked. In March, this UK government's own report on racism, the Sewell report, said that there was no systemic problem in the UK. I think the England men's football team would beg to differ. After the shocking racism on show over the last week, does the Prime Minister still stand by his government's belief that systemic racism is not a problem that exists in the United Kingdom?
Mr. Speaker, I do think that racism is a problem in the United Kingdom, and I believe it needs to be tackled and it needs to be stamped out with some of the means that I've described this morning. But when he attacks our party, my party, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid he's got the wrong target. This is a party that has not only had the first ever Muslim Secretary of State for Health, now he was former Chancellor, of course, but has had 2 female Prime Ministers, the most diverse cabinet in the history of this country, the most diverse government in the history of this country, Mr. Speaker. We are the party. If you're a young person growing up in a black or ethnic minority group in this country, we are the party that represent hope and opportunity. That is the reality about the Conservative Party today.
Julie Marston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK is packed full of incredible innovation-led businesses capable of leading entire industries, not least in Hertford and Stortford, where we are at the heart of the innovation corridor. I know this government wants to ensure the best possible access to venture funding over multiple rounds to catapult scale-up businesses full of potential into world-beating companies. Would the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how we can best make venture work for the scale-up community and transform some of our best ideas into some of the world's biggest businesses?
I thank the honourable lady, and she knows a lot about what the subject that she mentions. This is a fantastic opportunity for this country because we do indeed produce a great many tech breakthroughs, and we're looking very much at how to make sure that we scale up fast. But don't let her forget that as I speak, there are 3 countries in the world, Mr. Speaker, that have scaled up tech breakthroughs to unicorns worth more than $1 billion, 100 unicorns worth more than £1 billion. Only 3 countries have 100 unicorns. They are the United States of America, China and the United Kingdom.
Ms. Savile-Roberts.
For over 7 years, Plaid Cymru has been calling for the gargantuan HS2 railway to be treated as an England-only project so that Wales gets our fair share. Not a single inch of track will be in Wales, but we're footing the bill. Today, the Welsh Affairs Committee backed our call, calling the UK government's categorisation of HS2 in relation to Wales as unfair and biased. Will the Prime Minister today right this wrong, respect the Welsh Affairs Select Committee and ensure that Wales, like Scotland, receives our fair share from HS2.
Normally I have a great deal of respect and interest in what the Honourable Lady says, but actually in this case she's missed what the government is doing for transport connectivity in Wales and to Wales, something about which I know that she's as passionate as I am. Look at what we're doing in the Union Connectivity Review with the A55, with the North Wales Railway corridor into Liverpool, and look at the M4, Mr. Speaker. Never let it be forgotten that it was the Welsh Labour government, not her fault, of course, because she's plied, but it was the Welsh Labour government, Mr. Speaker, that spent £144 million on a study, and then didn't even do the diversion.
Let's go to Dr. Matthew Offord. Matthew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The circumstances of Jewish burials around the world is a sensitive and important issue to my constituents, and as such to me. In January 1942, the Nazis built 2 concentration camps on British soil on the island of Alderney. Conditions were appalling, with multiple deaths. However, there are just 397 recorded graves in Alderney, just 6.6% of a total population of 6,000 internees. In 1961, a British delegation undertook an inquiry into these atrocities that occurred on Alderney. Today, I ask the Prime Minister to authorise the release of all documents and information residing in the archives into those investigations, so we know what happened to thousands of people on the island of Alderney during World War II. To quote Elie Wiesel, to forget the dead will be akin to killing them again.
Minister.
My honourable friend makes an excellent point about the victims on Alderney. We must never forget the suffering of those who, on the Channel Islands, who suffered under occupation between 1940 and 1945. I'm told that the documents in question have been transferred to the National Archives, Mr. Speaker, but I will make sure that the relevant minister meets my honourable friend to discuss the matter further.
Kyle.
Mr. Speaker, there are currently 800,000 students self-isolating, and even after the reforms to the bubbling system, the government's failure to get the Delta variant under control means that infections rising over the summer will mean that the autumn term will be very severely affected in our schools. If the JCVI says that it is safe and appropriate for adolescents to receive the vaccine, will the Prime Minister promise that every single adolescent will be offered the vaccine over the summer and parents given all the information they need to make an informed decision so that schools can return and not continue to be affected by the bad policy making of this government and the failure to get the Delta variant under control?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman seems to want us to relax our rules on protecting people from coronavirus. I don't think that's the right thing to do at this time on self-isolation. And he also calls for us to go against the JCVI, and that is a matter, Mr. Speaker, for the JCVI.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the economy rebounding and a great many job vacancies currently available, does my right honourable friend agree that there's a tremendous opportunity emerging now to build a stronger British labour market post-Brexit and post-COVID, and that we need to help employers create jobs with better pay, more security, more opportunity for skills and career progression? Isn't that one of the keys for levelling up and ending the blight of in-work poverty?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend, and I know how much he cares about them, and that's one of the reasons why we're not only rolling out our massive plan for jobs, but why I'm proud that under this government we've increased the national living wage by a record amount to £8.91 per hour.
Let's go to Peter Grant. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The communities of Leslie, Markinch, Echuca, Thornton, Woodside and East Weems in my constituency are all either losing or have already lost their post offices since 2019. In addition, constituents in Colton, Balgony, Windigates, Cadham, Methil, Buckhaven and Methil Hill have all had the disruption of temporary closures or relocations, and the post office at Glenwood is currently closed until further notice. Given that the post office is 100% owned by his government, what exactly does it take for him to admit that the current trading model for the post office is not working for the people that rely on its services?
Mr. Speaker, the treatment of the post office, the masters, the sub-post masters in the recent computer malfunction was, I'm afraid, appalling, and I've made that clear. When it comes to protecting and supporting post offices, particularly rural post offices, but I think is what he was driving at, this government will do everything it can to protect them.
Let's go to Angela Richardson. Angela.
Mr. Speaker, too noisy, too much air pollution, and too much time wasted sitting in traffic, impacting productivity. The A3, as it narrows through Guildford, has been the cause of frustration for decades. According to Highways England, there are no more sticking plasters, which is why I'm calling for the A3 to be tunnelled under Guildford. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that as we build back better after the pandemic, investment into major road infrastructure solutions will be an important part of delivering on the levelling up agenda right across the whole country?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. I know the stretch of road that she refers to very well, as I'm sure many members across this House do as well. I would love to be able to clip my fingers and say that we could tunnel under Guildford. All I can say is, Mr. Speaker, in all candor, we will certainly look at it. But honourable members should be in no doubt that we're spending record sums, £27 billion on improving England's strategic roads, part of a £640 billion biggest ever package of infrastructure investment in this country.
Let's go to Howell Williams. Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many people are aghast at the potential consequences of trashing English COVID regulations in a triumphalist prime ministerial crash attack. Wales's regulations, to be announced today, are expected to take a cautious and measured approach. Will the Prime Minister make it clear that those visiting Wales this summer must stick to Welsh laws, and that on COVID regulations, he can only speak for England?
Prime Minister.
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker, and I think that people should stick to the rules and the guidance wherever they are, and I think he's absolutely right to talk about a cautious and a measured approach.
John Penrose.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will have seen that two recently published Government Commission reports, mine into competition policy and the Task Force on Innovation, Growth and Regulatory Reform, both make the same two recommendations to inject fresh energy into our better regulation regime so we can deliver our Brexit ambition of replacing ponderous EU regulations with simpler, digital and less burdensome UK equivalents without reducing quality standards in the process. So, will he take this opportunity to unleash a big post-Brexit better regulation dividend by declaring his enthusiastic support for a strong new one-in, two-out regime with no loopholes or exceptions right here today?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I think it is obvious that the UK has a massive amount to gain, not just from his report, which I much enjoyed, as I told him I thought was excellent, but also from the Tigger report, the task force on reducing regulation, and I thank them for that, and they'll be seeing, he and they will be seeing a lot more in the next few weeks.
Let's go to John Nicholson. John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Yesterday, at the Prime Minister's instigation, 333 Conservative members of this House, including some of its wealthiest, voted to deprive some of the world's poorest children of clean water. Education for girls programmes we guaranteed will be slashed. Polio eradication schemes too. Most people go into politics to make the world a better place, but the Prime Minister seems to be an exception. As he reads of the anguish his decision has caused, and as the father of a young child, doesn't he feel the merest hint of shame?
Mr. Speaker, I think the people of this entire country should be immensely proud of what the UK is doing abroad, whether it is educating millions of girls with an increased support for female education, whether it is helping the countries around the world to tackle climate change with £11.6 billion of investment, or helping refugees in Yemen or Syria or Ethiopia with £900 million. We're spending £10 billion a year on overseas aid alone, Mr. Speaker, to say nothing of what we're doing with vaccines. The whole country should be immensely proud of what the UK is doing in spite of this pandemic.
Let's go to Faye Jones. Faye.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you will know the Green Man Festival, which is an incredibly popular international music event, which takes place in Crickhowell in my constituency. The festival organisers have gone to great lengths to ensure the event is COVID secure, but the Welsh Government refuses to give them the green light to go ahead as a test event, unlike similar events in England. So will my right honourable friend help us by giving the Green Man Festival his full support and encourage the Welsh Government to get behind the festival at long last?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I haven't been invited to attend the Green Man Festival, but it sounds great. She's obviously my honourable friend's obviously a big fan. I will do what I can to pass her message along. I thank her for campaigning for Wales and for the Green Man Festival.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Jackie Davis was diagnosed with a type of blood cancer in April, which prevents her immune system from developing antibodies against COVID. Jackie wants to live as normal a life as possible and to do everyday things like going shopping, but she's terrified and she thinks that the rapid lifting of restrictions on Monday is putting her at risk. With the Delta variant about to spike due to the government's decision to lift restrictions, particularly the requirement to wear masks in public places, what's his message to people in Jackie's situation? Will he rethink his reckless gamble of lifting all these restrictions on Monday? And yes, Jackie did support staying in the EU.
Well, my message I'm sorry, obviously, for the condition that Jackie suffers, and I think that the Labour Party obviously needs to work out whether it's in favour of going ahead with step 4 or not, because it's not at all clear from what he has said or what the right honourable gentleman, the leader of the opposition, has said. They don't have a clue, Mr. Speaker. But what I can say to him is that we expect and recommend everybody, and I say this to Jackie, we expect and recommend everybody to wear a face covering in a confined space where you're meeting people you don't normally meet, and that is quite right.
Final question, Nikki Aiken.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I met with the Reading Agency that is about to launch its annual Summer Reading Challenge and hopes to reach 1 million children, primary school children, this year. What a great excuse to go to one of our brilliant libraries and take part in the COVID education catch-up. With this in mind, would my right honourable friend join me in encouraging every child across the nation to take part in the Summer Reading Challenge, pick up a book and read back better?
Yes. I thank my honour. She's quite right, and there couldn't be a better campaign for the summer. We put 1.9 million of support into the reading scheme that she mentions, but of course there's 200 million going into the Holidays Activities Fund, and there couldn't be a better, more useful, happier way of occupying your time on holiday than by reading a good book, Mr. Speaker.
Can I just gently say to all leaders that in the end I've had to cut off quite a few backbenchers because of the amount of time that's been taken up at the beginning. Can we think about those as well? It's so important that they get their questions heard. There's no points of order for them. I'm now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable necessary arrangements for the next business spread. Order. Order. I now call Nick Thomas-Symonds to ask the urgent question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for the Home Department if she will make a statement on the prevalence of racist abuse on social media.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the right honourable gentleman for his question. I'm going to take a moment, if I may, to reflect on the extraordinary success of the England football team in this tournament, knowing as we do that the background to the urgent question. That team played their hearts out for us, and they won through to the first international final for 55 years. They did so with enormous skill, with sportsmanship, and with dignity. They brought our country together, and they united us in joy. It is therefore a great shame that the success and achievements of every member of that team has been overshadowed by the racism of online trolls. The Prime Minister has just, in Prime Minister's questions, reinforced our collective condemnation of racism online and offline. Individuals who commit racist offences should face the full force of the law, and we already have robust legislation in place to deal with online hate. But governments around the world are grappling with how we collectively tame the wild west of the internet. We are leading the world in tackling online harms in the introduction of the Online Safety Bill. It will put in place measures to tackle illegal and legal but harmful abuse, including racist abuse. If major platforms do not meet their own standards to keep people safe and address abuse quickly and effectively, they could face enforcement action. Let one message ring loud and clear to those companies. There is no reason for companies to wait until the regime is fully running to take action against this abhorrent abuse. Indeed, such delays, I suspect, Mr. Speaker, will serve to stiffen the resolve of the government and indeed of this House. In addition to this, we have asked the Law Commission to conduct a wide-ranging review into hate crime, including offensive online communications. Let's put this in context. In 2019 to 2020, the police recorded more than 76,000 race hate crimes. Increases in police recorded hate crime in recent years have been driven by improvements in crime recording and better identification of what constitutes a hate crime. While statistics can help us track trends, we must, of course, always remember that behind the numbers are real people who are often left traumatised and shaken by their experiences. There is nothing so damaging, so corrosive about the impact that racism has both on victims and on our communities more widely. And so I'd like to conclude this statement with the words of our England captain, Gareth Southgate. We have been a beacon of light in bringing people together. The national team stands for everybody, and so that togetherness has to continue. We have shown the power our country has when it does come together. Mr. Speaker, let us all live up to those words.
No, call Nick Thomas.
I'm grateful for that response, but the reaction of this government has lacked urgency and completely failed to understand the scale of the revulsion that exists as a result of the events of recent days. The England men's football players have been a credit to the country on and off the pitch. And when they took the knee to stand against racism, this was not gesture politics. They spoke courageously to a desire for change across our country. And the failure of the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary to condemn those who were booing the team taking the knee was shameful, and it frankly makes their later protestations of support for the team no more than empty words. And the Home Secretary hasn't even bothered to turn up to answer this question today. The racist abuse to which Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka have been subjected is disgraceful. And such behaviour has been too common on social media for too long. Social media platforms have had more than long enough to act. The Home Secretary said to me on Monday that legislation will be absolutely pivotal, but the government has dragged its feet on bringing the Online Harms Bill forward. Worse still, the bill as currently proposed will not address what we've seen in the last couple of days. Allowing social media companies to set their own terms and conditions will not be enough. Will the government therefore commit to including criminal sanctions for senior executives in that bill? And in addition, will the Minister tell us exactly when the government will be acceding to the demand on these benches to extend football banning orders to offences that take place online, as was promised by the Prime Minister in Prime Minister's questions? And finally, will the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary finally show some leadership and apologise for siding with those who are booing and not with the brave England players?
Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'll just explain to the House where the Home Secretary is today. She is, at this very moment, hosting a long-standing meeting with charities who are on the front line of tackling victims, tackling violence against women and girls and survivors of those crimes. And so I hope the House will instead put up with me in order to answer this urgent question. But I know that the Home Secretary would reject many of the, indeed all of the allegations that the Honourable Gentleman has just made about her conduct. She has been relentless. She has been relentless in pursuing social media companies to ensure that they take much tougher stances, as we all expect, not just in relation to racism online, but also child sexual exploitation and terrorism and other offences. And so I do not accept his accusations across the dispatch box. In terms of the online safety bill, this is a landmark piece of legislation. The government has been very, very careful to ensure that this bill, A, receives the scrutiny of the House. That is why we are taking the confident step, I would say, of opening the draft bill up to pre-legislative scrutiny. We don't do that for every bill, but we want to get this bill right. The House will remember we did exactly the same with the domestic abuse bill, and the bill was made all the better for it. And so I'm delighted that Labour have provided now, I understand, the names for their committee members so that the pre-legislative scrutiny can take place at pace. But I underline the message that this House, but also the public, are watching the behaviours of online companies very carefully. Any company would be very wise to set out what it plans to do in relation to meeting the expectations of this place and the public when it comes to conducting their systems in a way that is clear and that prevents the sorts of abuse we have seen this weekend. In terms of football banning orders, again, the Honourable Gentleman, Right Honourable Gentleman, forgive me, would have heard the Prime Minister say very clearly at PMQs about the work that the government is conducting in relation to football banning orders. It is complex because we know, for example, some of the trolls that have targeted some members of the team over the weekend are overseas. But we want very much to work with football clubs and others to ensure that these orders have the powers that we all want them to have. And as I have said throughout, and this is the golden thread that runs throughout our work on tackling online crimes, what is illegal offline is illegal online, and that is the principle we will be adopting throughout the online safety bill.
Simon Fell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for a statement and for calling out some of the vile racist abuse that our brilliant players have had to face. On Sunday night, the Centre for Countering Digital Hate identified and reported 105 Instagram accounts which racially abused members of the England football team. As of this morning, only 6 of them have been taken down. So whilst we're getting warm words from some of these social media companies, that appears to be all we're getting from them at present. Can my honourable friend therefore confirm that the online safety bill will be brought forward with speed and that those who post this abuse online will be held to proper account?
I'm extremely grateful. Indeed, my honourable friend highlights some of the very practical responses that social media companies can take right now They don't need to wait for the online safety bill. I read with some dismay and anger a report in the paper today about how Instagram had applied its own rules, community rules, in relation to offensive emojis that were sent to players and indeed highly offensive words. Now, the social media companies themselves have to explain how exactly their community rules accord with the expectations and indeed the law of our country. But may I just make this point again? We are not alone in this. This is a challenge facing every democratic society in the world, and it is by working together, as we are doing with our voluntary principles on tackling terrorism and child sexual exploitation, that is how we're going to be able to make real progress against these companies and against this hatred.
We now go to SNP spokesperson Stuart C. MacDonald. Stuart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The disgusting online racism faced by England players is unfortunately overshadowing a fantastic tournament and a fantastic performance by an England team that has rightly attracted admiration and perhaps even a little bit of envy. So yes, we urgently need stronger online regulation. Content must be taken down faster, and platforms can no longer be allowed to support racist content through shamefully lax rules. And we need a debate on how we identify and punish those peddling this hate. But will she agree that social media regulation is not a silver bullet? Online racism reflects offline racism, and the government needs to take tackling racism, including structural and institutional racism, more seriously. Mr. Speaker, whatever our disagreements, no one could say that the previous Prime Minister didn't take tackling racism incredibly seriously. Why do we struggle to say the same about the current Prime Minister? Isn't it because on his watch, too many in his party have spent more time downplaying racism than tackling it, and more time ridiculing anti-racism campaigners than going after those who actually peddle racism? So yes, we'll support action to clamp down on online platforms, but will she support a change in attitude in her party?
Again, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and I can assure him that had Scotland reached the same dizzy heights as England, I'd have been cheering them on with great passion and strength of feeling. So I'm pleased that he is able to concede some support for the England team. In terms of his wider question about racism and hate speech across society, he is right to acknowledge that this is a matter for us all to tackle, and he will know, as sitting on the Home Affairs Select Committee as he does, the work that the government is doing to tackle hate speech and hate crimes. Of course, hate crimes is a very wide term. It includes not simply racism, but also hatred towards disabled people, towards transgender people and so on. And so that's why we have asked the Law Commission to look at online crimes to make sure that they're up to date and meet our expectations. But the wider message, I think, on racism more generally is actually I have been overwhelmed by the public's response to these trolls over the weekend. If we look at what happened to the mural in Withington, for example, and how the public responded, how angry they were that some individual had defaced the mural in Withington, and how positive the public's reaction to that has been. I think that is what we need to very much reflect on and act on. And indeed, that's why I quoted our captain, because I think he has summed up where the public and where we are on this. And it is by working together that we're going to tackle some of these hateful attitudes.
Well, good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Home Secretary herself has been at the receiving end of terrible racist abuse. So will the Minister agree with me that fighting racism online and in any other form is a priority for her and for the government? And does she also agree that this fight is mostly effective when racism and anti-racism campaigns are fully understood by everyone, and that what really matters is when meaningful action is taken to tackle the scourge that racism is?
Very much so. And the Home Secretary, like other members across this House, and we know, sadly, that women in particular, women of colour, are targeted, it seems, by online trolls. There are many, many people in our society who have to deal with this racism, both online but also sadly offline. And so I think part of our national conversation should be how we can each of us show our complete support for the campaigns to combat racism and to ensure that we are doing everything we can, both individually but as a country, to tackle racist behaviour. I know the Home Secretary feels very strongly about this, and indeed she has been particularly strong in her communications with tech companies across the 2 years she has been in office. But I know that that is a feeling shared by many in this House, and as I say, I'm very conscious that there are others in this place who are victims as well.
Let's go to the Chair of the Select Committee, Yvette Cooper. Yvette?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the Instagram profiles of England heroes this lunchtime are still racist posts, including blatantly racist words and emojis that have been up for more than 24 hours. I have challenged Instagram on this from the Home Affairs Committee repeatedly over the last few days. They have told me this morning that using some of those emojis as racist slurs is against their rules, yet inexplicably, they are still up and it is still taking them days to remove these posts. Speed matters. Can the Minister tell me what the online safety bill is actually going to do to take action on this speed issue and to penalise companies for not moving fast enough? Because at the moment, it looks as though that action won't happen. That's unacceptable. Keyboard cowards are being given a megaphone by these social media companies, and it has to stop.
Well, I completely agree with the Right Honourable Lady and Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. It is, I don't think these tech companies quite understand the anger and frustration of everyone involved in trying to scrutinise and to hold these companies to account when they come back at us with it doesn't meet our community rules. Words such as the words I suspect she is thinking about, the emojis, the language, this is unacceptable in any civilised society, and that includes online fora as well as offline. And so this bill is a real opportunity for the government, A, to lay the law down, but also, as I say, for parliamentarians across the House to make their views known. I have long urged the companies to listen carefully to members of Parliament in this place, and I would urge them again to do so, because if they don't listen, we will act.
We now come to Felicity Button.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As someone who represents one of the most diverse constituencies in the entire country, can I put on the record how abhorrent racism is of any form? Yeah. Does my honourable friend agree with me that many of these online trolls hide behind the cloak of anonymity? Can she confirm that the police can still prosecute anonymous postings, and will she consider whether we should outlaw online posting? Because I do think people would take more personal responsibility if it were in their own names.
Well, the Honourable Lady alights upon a very important point, but also actually one that will require the scrutiny and the debate of this House, because whilst we know that many, many cowards hide behind anonymous accounts, there are people who use their anonymity legitimately. So, for example, victims of domestic abuse and indeed whistleblowers in very, very restrictive regimes overseas. So I know that this place, when we come to scrutinise this bill, will weigh those arguments up very, very carefully. But again, I do have great sympathy with her viewpoint that if people are able to hide behind these accounts anonymously, then of course it makes it much more difficult for the police to trace them. And so again, we need to think through, I think, as, collectively, where we are prepared to draw the boundaries in the wild west of the internet.
We now come to Sarah Sultana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister gave the usual Tory platitudes. Yes, she condemned the horrific racism our England stars have faced, but what was she think about the Prime Minister when he was doing, when he was describing black people as pickaninnies with watermelon smiles, when he used newspaper columns to mock Muslim women as letterboxes and bank robbers, when he refused to condemn the booing of England players taking the knee, and when his Home Secretary derided that anti-racist message as gesture politics. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, like England star Tyrone Mings has said, that the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister were stoking the fire of racism, giving the green light to racism, and only now, when the consequences are clear, are they feigning outrage?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I had hoped that we were going to be able to conduct this debate in a measured and collective way. I don't genuinely think the Honourable Lady is accusing either the Prime Minister of this country or indeed the Home Secretary of racism. That would be a truly extraordinary allegation to make. But I hope at some point we will be able to work together to tackle racism. That is what we all want to do. That is what the work of this government is directed towards. And I hope that we're able to just lower the tone a little bit and understand that again, she's trying to shout at me, again, that in tackling these horrific instances of racism, we need to work collectively together. And shouting at me across the dispatch box is not going to help with that.
Let's go to Damien Collins. Damien.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my honourable friend agree with me that the incidence of racism on social media over the last few days shows why the approach taken in the draft online safety bill is right, that we need an independent regulator that will hold the companies to account? They've failed to take down this abuse, even though it's against their platform policies. They've failed to take it down when people have complained about it. And worse than that, their own recommendation tools were actually promoting the content on Sunday night. This has to stop, and it'll only stop when there's independent regulation of these companies.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. He is absolutely right in his description of this bill as being necessary and required. As I said, I think in 10, 15 years' time, we will look back on this era of the internet, and we will, with the regulations in place, we will be in a much better place in terms of people being able to access social media and so on in a positive, healthy way, rather than having to put up with this hatred that we have seen in some quarters. But I also would emphasise that with the bill, we have, as part of imposing this duty of care, we are proposing fines on the companies concerned of up to £18 million, or, importantly, up to 10% of qualifying annual turnover. I suspect that second figure may be the figure that helps to concentrate minds.
Let's go to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't the issue that the government has refused to take any action towards ending social media discrimination of any kind? This, in turn, has fanned the flames of divisiveness and hate in our communities that we're currently witnessing, as my friend, the member for Coventry South, has just pointed out. The Amnesty International report on toxic Twitter pointed out that black women are 84% more likely to experience racist abuse online than anyone else. So the question to the Minister is quite simply this: what real steps is she going to take urgently to ensure that no one, and I mean absolutely no one, is able to post any racist abuse online at all?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I suspect I'm not the only person who has felt a little bit astonished that it is this right honourable member who's chosen to ask that question about taking immediate action to tackle racism. I remind the House of the findings of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission under his watch. Labour has unlawfully discriminated against, harassed or victimised people because they are Jewish. And I am also reminded that a Jewish female MP had to have police protection at his party conference because of fears of her own safety. So I will listen to many, many people about tackling racism. I will work with pretty much anyone, but I must say I will take a long spoon in which to sup with this particular member.
Let's just go to Caroline Notes. Caroline.
Mr. Speaker, it is popular to blame mutant algorithms for many things, but social media giants could use algorithms to quickly and effectively shut down accounts spouting racist bile. Please can my honourable friend assure me that the government is prepared to take action against platforms like Instagram, who've been painfully slow to respond to the horrific racist abuse targeted at black players since Sunday?
Indeed, and again, my right honourable friend is alights upon a very, very important point, that this power is already within the reach of internet companies. They seem to think that their community rules somehow take precedence over the laws of our country. And I can only imagine it's the same across other countries in the world. So the message to those tech companies is that please listen to the public's outrage, actually, at some of these posts that are festering on your platforms, and deal with them. It is simply not acceptable to expect players or victims of this abuse to deal with it themselves. These tech companies have the algorithms, they have the powers, I've no doubt, in order to intervene, and they should use them now.
Let's go to Dame Margaret Hodge. Margaret.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is similar, but the racist abuse which was targeted at the black footballers has been absolutely abhorrent. And the tech giants could have stopped it, but they chose not to because it suits their business model. In October 2020, Mark Zuckerberg decided, literally on a whim, to remove Holocaust denial from his Facebook, and he did that. In February 2021, Instagram, after a public outcry, made a U-turn, changed their policy, and started to regulate some direct messages of racial abuse. So does the minister agree with me that it's not the powers or the capability of the tech giants that is lacking, but the will? Everybody knew the Wembley final could result in a torrent of abuse, yet the online platforms chose not to plan, not to monitor, not to act. And does she further agree with me that if we're to turn empty rhetoric into action, it's not enough to fine the companies, but the government must legislate to hold the senior executives to personal account and be personally liable for failing to remove harmful content from their platforms?
Well, I'm extremely grateful and mindful of the own experiences that the Right Honourable Lady has had in terms of abuse online and offline. And I agree with her that, of course, that these powers exist already. And so one can only conclude in the cases that have been highlighted both in this chamber and in newspapers that the businesses concerned do not wish to remove those items. I've no doubt, if I'm wrong, that they will correct me. But there must be a will there. And I very much hope that a former member of this House, one Sadiq Khan, who, as we know, advises Facebook at a very senior level in California. I very much hope he is advising Facebook as to the powers of this place and the anger that members across this chamber are feeling, because it seems to me responding to these concerns makes not just good moral sense, but also good business sense.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The abuse we saw after England's heroic final Euro game is beyond disgusting and has no place in any world, let alone the modern world. I know my honourable friend will agree it is not beyond the ingenuity of social media platforms to deploy their vast coding expertise to develop AI and algorithmic solutions to rapidly remove disgusting, abusive, racist posts while still being able to protect appropriate freedom of speech. Sadly, there is more than enough training data for them to use.
Very much so. And my challenge to these tech companies is, look, you have some of the brightest brains in the world. You recruit from the top universities, you pay, I imagine, handsomely, use those brilliant brains to do some good and to stop this abuse on your platforms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The whole England team has been remarkable in opposing racism and championing justice and equality for all. Sadly, they have not had the full support of this government. It is up to all of us with a public platform, including the Home Secretary to personally confront racism in all its forms and give our full support to those who are working on it. The Home Secretary is not here today, so I cannot ask her personally, but can I ask her, will she add her support to the petition to ban racists for life from all football matches in England, which now has over 1 million signatures?
I don't know whether the Honourable Lady was in the chamber, but when I explained at the beginning that the Home Secretary is in fact hosting a meeting, a long-standing meeting with charities that work with survivors of violence against women and girls. This is, I hope the House would understand. In terms of her general allegations, I mean, again, I'm minded to just point out that the Home Secretary herself receives extraordinary levels of online hatred. It is eye-watering, some of the things that she and, in fairness, others across this House have to deal with. But I do, as I say, just do urge on members to join together with us in tackling this racism. And in terms of the petition, she may have missed the Prime Minister's answer in PMQs. We are going even better than the petition because we are looking urgently at football banning orders to ensure that people with these racist views who are expressing them are stopped from going to our matches entirely.
Susanna.
Mr. Speaker. Now, I do believe this great and united nation is one of the most tolerant and anti-discrimination nations I know, and that what we have witnessed is orchestrated hate crime by the minority and trolls. And does the Minister agree that we need tougher punishments for racially driven violence, intimidation and abuse on social media, and that the biggest issue I see are the social media companies who have been very slow to take abuse off their platforms?
Again, and my old friend, I know, has worked assiduously, not just in relation to online hatred directed to on racist grounds, but also, of course, other categories of people, other groups of people who are affected on social media, including women. But I hope she will work tirelessly with the government on our forthcoming online safety bill to ensure that these companies do what they should do, clear out their own backyard, but that we also work together to tackle the horrific attitudes that underline this abuse.
Let's go to Catherine McKinnell. Catherine.
Thank you. Minister, we live in an era where online abuse is becoming normalised. The disgusting comments directed at our footballers on social media has in many cases been illegal, and the perpetrators must be brought to justice. But in other cases, while being technically legal, the abuse is still extremely harmful and distressing. Warm words and veiled threats are clearly not enough. Will she therefore commit today to ensuring that legal but harmful content will be adequately addressed in the online safety bill, to improving the bill to ensure social media companies' terms and conditions meet a minimum standard, and to ensuring that those standards are enforced so that harmful content is swiftly removed from their platforms?
Yes, very much happy to confirm that, of course, we're looking at legal but harmful material. And indeed, I would just pray to the House's attention the fact that the online safety bill is a really significant piece of legislation, but there will be other fora for legislating, other vehicles for legislating on these sorts of crimes, including, of course, the Victims Bill, but also the Law Commission's work on online hate law more generally. It's really important we get this right. You know, the law has, I think, probably struggled to keep up to date with some of these developing advances in technology, and we've got to make sure that it is future-proofed to cover these terrible crimes.
Let's go to Caroline Ansell. Caroline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since Sunday's final, everywhere I have been, everyone I have spoken to in my constituency has expressed nothing but pride in our England team. Racist abuse online has in fact inspired an outpouring of support and solidarity. But in contrast, figures released by Twitter in 2020 show the company responded to fewer than 50% of all requests for information from law enforcement in the UK. Alongside support for campaigns like Kick It Out, does my honourable friend agree with me that such social media platforms must seriously raise their game or face serious repercussions?
I completely agree with my honourable friend, and I'm delighted to hear that the football team have received such support in her constituency. And indeed, I suspect that is the experience of us all, actually. And the racist attitudes that have been displayed by a small number of people, and indeed trolls, some of whom we know originate from overseas. We want that, they are very much in the minority. The overwhelming majority of us are incredibly proud of our great team.
Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer to my register of members' interest in my position as co-chair of the Show Racism, the Red Card all-party parliamentary group. So, can I ask the Minister, Show Racism and the Red Card do fantastic work in tackling racist abuse online and elsewhere, but the Home Office in its wisdom cut its funding to zero 18 months ago, but Show Racism and the Red Card still get funding from both the Scottish and Welsh governments. So can the Minister, or will the Minister, meet me and parliamentary colleagues, Show Racism the Red Card, so we can discuss their funding to help tackle this scourge in our society?
I'm very happy to do that, and I should point out as well that there's a huge programme of work that continues, including, for example, the online crime hub run by the police that we help to fund. But very happy to meet him to discuss those issues. Look, campaigns that help to tackle racism are clearly in our country's interest, so very, very happy to meet him to discuss it further.
Sunday night should have been a celebration of achievement. Instead, we woke up on the morning with racism aimed at three men simply doing their job. And this is not acceptable. We know social media is at the centre of the storm, and there's a growing influence across our lives, from bullying, racism, to my interest of body image. So would my right honourable friend agree with me that social media campaigns and their companies have a duty and responsibility to work proactively with government and the police to better our society?
Yes, I most certainly do agree with my honourable friend. And look, in fairness, we have, as the House would expect, we do a lot of work with online companies across a great range of subject matter. Only yesterday, indeed, I was meeting business leaders, including tech leaders, to discuss how we can create opportunities for our hardest to reach young people who are at risk of serious violence. So I'm grateful to them for those activities, but I do think the message is coming out loud and clear, not just in this country, but across the world, that we have got to somehow tame, as I say, the wild west of the internet so that these more hateful practices are not dominating our national headlines and taking away from the great achievements of our England team.
Let's go to Andrew Gwynn. Andrew.
Thank you. Racist abuse online isn't just abhorrent, it normalises and desensitisses racist views offline too. And can I say the scenes she's mentioned of the community placing messages of support and love on the defaced Marcus Rashford mural is the true spirit of Greater Manchester, not the graffiti of some pea-brain moron. As a Man City fan, I say that United's Rashford is among the best of us. Now, I welcome the PM's commitment to extending football banning orders to cover online abuse, something this side of the House has been calling for some time. So given the urgency, can I ask her when this will happen and how it will happen?
I will happily write to the honourable gentleman on this. I don't have a time frame to hand, but I will very much write to him. And may I thank him as a Man City fan and a Member of Parliament of one of the greatest cities on the planet. Can I thank him for raising the great humour and also the great support that the people of Withington have shown recently.
Jacob.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know social media companies have the tools and powers to prevent online hate, yet it's still happening day in, day out. And the incidents following Sunday evening have shone a light on this disgusting abuse. If social media companies will not act on their own, what actions will the government take to ensure we finally put a full stop to online hate?
Well, my honourable friend has identified the opportunity that the government has, and indeed the House has, in relation to the online safety bill. As I say, I have no doubt that powers that be within the tech companies are watching this debate very closely, and I would assume they have got the message loud and clear from all sides of the House as to our expectations on their next moves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for coming this afternoon. The racist incidents online don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in a world where, according to the YMCA, 95% of young black British children have witnessed racism in education. They exist in a world where, according to the Run Me Trust, racism is systematic in the UK, in our health system, in the criminal justice system, in employment, and even in politics, which I know all too well. To every young, black, minority ethnic person, young person watching today, I want them to know that they have a place in this society. They can reach here like I did from a council estate in Brixton, and I will continue to do my bit to ensure we speak out against racism. And this racism also exists in a vacuum where so-called spectators even want to boo their own team. Disgraceful. Social media companies need to take a lot more action, and until they feel the full weight of the law, they won't understand that. So can the Minister confirm if the government will introduce criminal sanctions against social media executives in the online harms bill?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady for her comments? And she spoke with such passion, and she's right. Every time she and other members of this House stand up across the chamber to speak on behalf of their constituents, they are role models. And so I'm delighted that this House is more diverse than it has ever been. It needs to be more diverse, but I'm also very proud of the fact that the government is more diverse than it has ever been, and indeed the fact that we have two of the great offices of state filled by people who happen to be of ethnic minority heritage. I think that is a real credit to our country and how one can achieve what one wants with hard work and effort. In terms of the question relating to executives, this is something that we are looking at in the bill. There are measures within there that have been set out in terms of dealing with executives, but of course I welcome her and any other members' input with DCMS to ensure that the bill is meeting the expectations of all.
David Hines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, some of these vile abusers are totally open, but the cloak of anonymity does embolden others. And it also opens a door for hostile actors with their divisive exploitation that can sometimes follow. Now, as the Minister said in response to an earlier question to our friend from Kensington, anonymity is very important in some contexts, including, for example, survivors of domestic abuse. But it doesn't follow that it's therefore required to be available in all contexts. And if you're online communicating in your own identity, shouldn't you be able to say you only want to hear from, be commented on by other people using their own identity? Will the government please look at that again for the online safety bill?
That is an extremely interesting point, and I promise I will look into it.
Liz Roberts.
Like thousands of other Welsh fans, I stand with Marcus Rashford and others, including many Welsh players, against the vile racist abuse they've received. Now, Tory Home Secretaries have wasted years through their inaction on this issue. In 2016, I introduced an online abuse and cybercrime bill, which included tackling racist abuse online to make the current fragmented law workable in the 21st century. 5 years on, and we're still waiting for action. But a specific question: will the online harms bill provide clarity on what constitutes illegal racist hate speech against groups of people, as well as offences against individuals?
So the Honourable Lady knows that we have asked the Law Commission to look into the laws relating to malicious online communications. This is, and I declare my interest as a former prosecuting counsel, this is a horribly complex area of law, and as technology develops with, for example, deep fake images and so on, it's very complex, and it is precisely why we asked the Law Commission to look into it. In terms of her other challenges, I mean, again, the bill is going to be scrutinised at length by the House, so she will have the opportunity, no doubt, to put her views forward. But I do want to get the message out. This bill, the online safety bill, needs to be considered carefully, because we very much want it to be a piece of legislation that stands the test of time. And as I say, I can't really think of another country in the world that has entered into such an ambitious project to try to hold some of these corners of the internet, bring them into the light so that we're not seeing these sorts of practices online.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Much of the online racist abuse against England's footballers is thought to have originated from overseas social media accounts. I wonder if my honourable friend could tell the House what steps she and her department are taking with counterparts in other countries to ensure there's a concerted international effort to stamp out these appalling attacks, that there is no hiding place.
Yes, I think the Honourable Gentleman's referring to the early analysis of the Premier League. He will know, I hope, will be reassured by the fact that we are looking into this with some urgency because as a global football competition, it is perhaps no leap of the imagination that some of this abuse may have come from overseas. We want to look at that very carefully, but also, again, it underlines the point that the internet, it clearly is available across the world, and so we have to act collectively with other nation states in order to bring these trolls to a heel, and we are already doing that through the Five Eyes and the voluntary principles that we have one agreement on in relation to child sexual exploitation and tackling terrorism.
Let's go to Gregory Campbell. Gregory.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join in the congratulations and tributes to the England football team that the Minister has paid and others, and also the condemnation of the abuse suffered by the 3 black players. In a couple of months' time, David in the form of Northern Ireland will take on Goliath in the form of Italy in the World Cup qualifying, Mr. Speaker, and we will endeavour to build on the national pride and endeavour that we've seen in the past few weeks. But on the online safety bill, can the Minister reassert the issue she's raised several times, that if the providers do not act, then they will suffer grievous financial hardship? We will hit them where it hurts, in the corporate pockets.
Well, I'm very pleased to join the Honourable Gentleman's support for Northern Ireland. Italy, I'm sure, will pose no problem for Northern Ireland. I wish them all the greatest of successes. But on the very serious subject of our work to tackle the online hatred that we've seen this weekend, again, the online safety bill is a landmark piece of legislation, and I very much look forward to working with the House in our efforts to take it through.
Let's go to Craig Williams. Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Racism, racist bullying, and any form of bullying is completely unacceptable, and I hope my honourable friend uses all of her powers to stamp down on such behaviour. With regards to divisiveness in our society, it appears that it has become about whether or not you take the knee. Would my honourable friend agree with me that the single biggest cause of divisiveness is the lack of tolerance and the lack of respect from both sides of the argument equally? And it doesn't matter if you choose to take the knee or not. What matters is that you have tolerance and respect for those that want to, and equally for those that don't want to.
Very much. The Honourable Gentleman has, I think, defined what it is to live in a free country. We abide by the principles of free speech within the genuine and legitimate confines of legislation such as hate crime legislation, but the message surely coming from our football team is that we have a wonderfully diverse football team with enormous talent, enormous skills, and we, just as they have treated us with tolerance and respect in terms of their humility in the face of the nation's joy and adoration, so too we should extend that to each other and treat each other with toleration and respect.
Let's go to Janet Davey. Janet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know that when it comes to racist abuse, this is not just confined to social media. On the 3rd of July, the Sunday Times ran an article stating that Raheem Sterling's success in the Euros was being celebrated on the violent streets of Jamaica where he grew up. This sort of ignorant and tasteless commentary only feeds the stereotypes that Black people and Black populations or countries are dangerous. Will the Minister today condemn the disgusting attitudes that have been propelled by tabloids and broadsheets for decades, and what will she do about it?
Well, I haven't seen the report that she refers to, but I have to say my memory of Raheem Sterling is the story he's told of growing up in the shadow of the arch of Wembley and imagining himself playing under that arch, but instead of being outside the stadium, being inside the stadium. And of course, he has done exactly that. And that shows that in this country, there is opportunity, there is the chance, if you have the talents of Mr. Sterling and others, to really succeed. And I very much hope that that is the message that comes out of our debates, both this afternoon, but also more generally in relation to the horrendous hate crime we have seen over the weekend.
Richard Owen.
Mr. Speaker. And does the Minister agree with me that this should be a matter where actually all sides of the House and all parties come together to ensure that we put an end to racist abuse once and for all? And can she highlight how, through the work on the online safety bill, that this will actually happen?
My honourable friend is absolutely right that by working together, we are so much stronger. And I think today, actually, we have seen that there is great unity of intent and will across the House to ensure that those who are expressing racist views are held to account, they're brought to justice, but that each part of society plays its part, including online companies.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister think that their colleagues' refusal to condemn the booing of players for taking the knee, or the dismissal of taking the knee as gesture politics, or Number 10's denial of institutional racism in the UK, or the government's 3-year delay of legislation to the crackdown on online abuse could have given space to a culture or hostile environment which sees the racist abuse of England players as acceptable? And does the Minister regret that denial of the problem and the failure to act?
If I'm just going to temper the Honourable Lady's remarks with some facts. The Home Secretary did not say that she supports football fans booing England players for taking the knee. The Prime Minister was clear in saying that members of the public should be cheering our team, not booing them. And it is, if I may say, we've got to be very careful with how we handle the facts so that when we are presenting our plans for the future to help eradicate racism and our plans for taming the internet, that is how we will achieve this. A little bit of back and forth over the dispatch box is of course welcome and part of our rich tapestry of democracy, but I do hope that the Honourable Lady will stick to the facts next time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I draw the Minister's attention to the paradox identified by Sundar Katwala, who's the Director of British Future, that there are far fewer overt racists in Britain today than there were 20 or 30 years ago, and that's a very good thing. And there are far fewer racist attitudes in Britain. But because of social media and because of the fact that everyone is always online, individuals from black and ethnic minority communities experience far more racism on a day-to-day basis than they did then because of that paradox. And this is the reason why fixing this needs to be a public policy priority, and why the people in Twitter and Facebook really need to step up. They need to stop people who get banned from opening new accounts, and they need to address the algorithms that promote this material, and that way is that how we can rebuild community cohesion.
I think we all acknowledge the echo chamber that social media provides and how being available online across the world enables perhaps just a single person to have far more volume added to their voice than would be the case if they were known, as they usually are, to be sitting in their bedrooms rather pathetically in the corner, tapping away on their laptops or their phones. So I think the more we build resilience amongst our young people actually in schools to prepare themselves to understand that torrents of abuse like this can in fact represent only a tiny number of people, but also very much building on the education, the cultural attitudes that we're seeking to address through RSHE education in schools to ensure that people understand the principles of tolerance, of kindness, of being able to debate without hatred. You know, there are many ways of tackling racism. I look forward to debating them in the months and years to come, but we don't need to take chunks out of each other whilst we're so debating.
I now suspend the House for 3 minutes to enable necessary arrangements to be made for the next business. Order.